To begin, a story from Polish Jewish folklore. A long time ago, there was a family who lived very happily in a small cottage. And one day, it was the parents and the child who were living there who learned that the grandparents were going to come and live with them. So the child was very excited about this, and the parents, they were excited as well, and also a little nervous. Their cottage was very small, and the parents were worried that there wouldn't be enough room, and the house would become much noisier and more crowded. So the farmer went to the rabbi in the village, and he said, "Rabbi, please tell me, give me counsel, what should I do?" The rabbi says, "Let them come." So the grandparents move in, and it is a bit crowded and more noisy. So the farmer goes back to the rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, I did what you said. Now my in-laws are here, and it's really crowded in our house." The rabbi thinks for a moment and he says, "Do you have chickens?" "Of course I have chickens," says the farmer. "Bring them into the house," says the rabbi. The farmer is confused, but he thinks the rabbi is wise, and so he trusts him. So he goes home and brings all the chickens to live inside the house with the family. But it is no less crowded or noisy. In fact, it's worse with all this clucking and pecking and flapping of wings. So the farmer goes back to the rabbi, and he says, "I did what you said, Rabbi. Now I'm living with my in-laws and with my chickens, and it's really very crowded in the house." The rabbi thinks for another moment. He says, "Do you have any goats?" "Well, of course I have goats," says the farmer. "Bring them into the house," says the rabbi. And the farmer is confused, but he goes back and he brings the goats into the house, and it is even more crowded and noisy, with the chickens and their clucking and their flapping and the goats baaing and getting their heads locked together against the walls of the house and each other. So the next day, the farmer goes back to the rabbi, and he says, "I did what you said, Rabbi. Now my in-laws have no place to sleep because the chickens have taken their bed, and the goats' heads are sticking out the windows, and everyone's making a lot of noise." The rabbi thinks for a moment. He says, "Do you have any sheep?" Then he says, "Oh, you must have some sheep." And the farmer says, "Of course I have sheep." "Bring them into the house," says the rabbi. So then there are sheep and chickens and goats and in-laws, and it is very noisy and very crowded, and it's starting to smell like a barn. So completely frustrated, the farmer goes back to the rabbi. He says, "Rabbi, I have followed your advice. I have done everything you said. My in-laws have no place to sleep, the goats have destroyed my windows, and the sheep are breaking things. The house smells like a barn." The rabbi frowned. He closed his eyes and he thought for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is what you do. Take the sheep back to the barn. Take the goats back to the field, and the chickens back to their coop." The farmer ran home and did exactly as the rabbi had told him. And by the time the last chicken was settled in the coop, the house looked rather lovely. It was quiet. There was room. And so they lived in a spacious and comfortable home together, the farmer, his wife, his child, and his in-laws. Behind the turkey dinner, gratitude is the focus of this holiday of Thanksgiving. And in recent years, you may have noticed that gratitude has gotten a lot of press. It's kind of like, especially, a lot of press relative to other spiritual or religious concepts. Have you noticed this? So Oprah, right? She's famous for her gratitude journal, where she writes down 5 things she's grateful for every day. And Oprah goes so far as to say this is the single most important thing she has ever done. It's almost as if all the spiritual concepts, salvation, forgiveness, humility, mercy, justice, are all sitting at a table at lunch, and gratitude is picked by the popular crowd, like, hey, come, hang out with us. And there's some good reasons why, of course. Motivational speakers, therapists, life coaches, even scientific researchers can document that those who particularly practice gratitude have lower blood pressure, higher levels of positive emotion, more joy, more optimism, act with more generosity, feel less lonely and isolated. Such that there's million-dollar research initiatives now being offered to expand the scientific understanding of gratitude. And yet, gratitude is not new. As the story of the farmer and the rabbi reminds us, this wisdom has long been pointing people towards counting their blessings as a way to deal with life changes and challenges. To be honest, when I read some of the research on why I should be more grateful and how much it would help me, I can feel within myself a distancing, a bit even of repulsion. I'm certainly not sold on this idea that gratitude is going to instantly equal more happiness, or that there's a quick fix gratitude practice for the challenges that occur in life. And so it can be difficult to hear about how having an attitude of gratitude would make everything better. Perhaps it's time for me to invite some goats into my house. In many families, certainly in mine, when we sit together around the dinner table, the Thanksgiving table in particular, but often in general around the dinner table, it is part of our tradition to go around and say what we're grateful for. And each year, there's always someone who isn't feeling particularly grateful, who would pretty much rather be anywhere other than sitting around the table with their family. I know I've even been that person. Does anyone else have that experience? It's kind of like there's a Scrooge of Thanksgiving. Someone who feels all bah humbug about turkey and cranberry sauce, while everyone else is having a grand time with their gratitude and mashed potatoes. It is a question worth grappling with. When we don't feel grateful, when things maybe really are hard and ugly and painful, what do we do? What can we be grateful for? The story of the rabbi and the farmer, it's ridiculous, and yet I see myself reflected in that farmer. My expectation of comfort creates tension within me and fear about, is there going to be enough space or room or comfort for me such that I can be blind to what it is that I have? I'm prone to pushing aside pain and suffering, try to get as far away as possible from unwelcome guests. And yet it is in these struggling moments, these experiences of being stretched, that paradoxically I find a new ground to stand on, that I'm asked to lean further and further into trust and into community. Words from the 13th century Persian poet and mystic Jaladani Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. This poem asks an awful lot. To be honest, I'm usually not there myself. Welcome and entertain them all. That crowd of sorrows, even a serious diagnosis, even a crippling grief, even injustice, even anxiety, even. It seems counterintuitive to invite in this pain and loneliness, to say to these emotions or these experiences, you are welcome here, make yourself at home, meet them laughing at the door. In his recent memoir, Bruce Springsteen, he describes his own decades-long struggle with depression. He says, I always see it as a car. All your selves are in it, and a new self can get in, but your old self is still in the car, and sometimes that old self or that hard self, that depressed self just takes the wheel. There are times when unwelcome guests take the wheel. And there are times when, whether or not we meet them laughing or welcome them at the door, we cannot keep them out. We don't get to choose what guests arrive at our door. We can throw all our might. We can oppose them at every step and exhaust and drain ourselves. We can ignore them. We can try to remain indifferent. We can collapse, feeling their weight bearing down on us. All of this has happened to me. I know it well. The hard truth is that we don't actually get to choose a great deal of our experience. The families we're born into, the people who raise us, the physical limitations of our bodies, the global systems of oppression and privilege we live in. This is what the Buddha 2,500 years ago spoke to when he articulated the first noble truth, dukkha. Dukkha is a Pali word, and it is often translated in English into suffering. You may have heard that before. The first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is suffering. This morning, even as we wrestle with unwelcome guests of sorrow, those crowds of sorrows, I want to wrestle with this concept of life as suffering, because it is a Buddhist scholar, Lee Brasington, who's been challenging this translation of dukkha. He says that to say dukkha is suffering is actually too harsh of a translation. When Buddha is using this word, he's referring both to the essential human experiences of living, dying, experiencing illness and grief, but also the minor human annoyances that just come as part of daily life. Brasington says that the Buddha is saying both having the flu is dukkha, but also losing one's sunglasses is dukkha. So if we translate losing one's sunglasses is suffering, that might not be the best translation. He experiments with other translations of this word dukkha, such as stress or unsatisfactory or a bad space. But the word that he lands on for him and his understanding of this noble truth is bummer. So let's play with that for a moment. The first noble truth of Buddhism: life is a bummer. It has a bit different ring to it, doesn't it, than life is suffering? Life is a bummer. It's kind of honest, but maybe a little less hopeless than life is suffering. And of course, all the teachings of the Eightfold Path are really offering people tools and lenses to say there's a way out of these experiences. That one of the reasons life is a bummer is because we don't get what we want. And often we get what we don't want. That just happens. And it happens to all of us. So it feels bold to say this because I have such respect for the mystic poet Rumi. But I feel it needs to be said. You do not have to be grateful for those unwelcome guests of sorrow when they first arrive. They can be powerful. Suffering can shake us to our core. And to say that we should be grateful for everything, that simply might be too much to ask of ourselves. It simply isn't how we're built. My mentor, Reverend Arvid Straube, reminded me recently that the road to gratitude is sometimes very long. And that what the Buddha teaches, as what is reflected in modern psychology, is that we are able to choose how we respond to our experiences. There is a way to respond to life and all of its bummers with some gratitude of just being grateful that we're human and feeling at all. It might begin with counting the blessings that we don't share rooms with goats or chickens. Or as the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says, you can always feel grateful for a non-existent toothache. So don't have to be grateful for your greatest suffering, but you don't have to wait till you're happy to practice gratitude either. We can feel lousy and still find something very small to be grateful for. This is the trick, to start very, very small. Grateful for this exhale, for this sweater, for this seat, for this friend. Recently, I saw a meme with a twist on a common piece of wisdom. It read, "This too shall pass. It may pass like a kidney stone, but it will pass." And it is also true, I see this often as a pastor, that given time and distance and healing and support, people do reflect back on the hardest times of their lives when they didn't feel at all grateful for what was banging down the door, and say, well, I would never want to go through that again. I got something out of it. So if there is a Scrooge at your Thanksgiving table, or later at Christmas, my suggestion is to give them a pass. Feed them and love them anyway. And if you are the Scrooge, give yourself a pass. It doesn't work to force gratitude. May we recognize all that crowds our house, like so many barnyard animals, that squawk and make noise and crowd us and challenge us. Grateful if nothing else, the reminder of how good it feels when they are cleared out to the barn. Amen, and blessed be.